Who's That Knocking at My Door? Martin Scorsese's debut feature, originally called I Call First, was shot over several years starting in 1965 and finally released in 1967. It stars Harvey Keitel in his first major role as JR, a young Italian-American Catholic grappling with guilt, desire, and identity. The film was made on a shoestring budget of about $75,000, and most of it was self-financed through small grants and personal funds. Scorsese shot much of it in New York City using handheld cameras and natural lighting, giving it a documentary-style feel. The movie mixes traditional narrative with experimental editing and uses jump cuts, freeze frames, and overlapping dialogue. The project evolved significantly when Scorsese added a black and white dreamlike sequence involving sexual violence to meet the demands of a distributor who wanted more commercial appeal. The film's Catholic themes, especially around sin and redemption, became a blueprint for Scorsese's later work. Its use of popular music, including tracks by The Doors and the Moonglows, marked an early example of Scorsese's signature soundtrack approach. Though raw and unpolished, the film introduced Scorsese's obsession with moral conflict, masculinity, and Catholic guilt. Boxcar Bertha. Released in 1972, this was Martin Scorsese's second feature and his first studio-backed film, produced by Roger Corman under American International Pictures. Based loosely on the autobiography Sister of the Road, it stars Barbara Hershey as Bertha, a young woman swept into a life of crime during the Great Depression. David Carradine plays Big Bill Shelley, a union organizer and Bertha's lover. The film was shot in Arkansas with a budget of about $600,000 and production lasted only 24 days. Scorsese didn't write the screenplay, but his fingerprints are all over the visual style, especially in the chaotic editing and expressive use of violence. The movie blends exploitation elements like nudity and gunfights with a deeper undercurrent of class struggle and labor politics. It tackles themes of economic injustice and systemic corruption, though it never strays far from its genre roots. While Scorsese later admitted the film didn't reflect his personal style, it helped him get noticed by influential filmmakers. The ending features one of his earliest uses of religious symbolism and visual brutality, foreshadowing techniques he'd sharpen later. It's not subtle, but it showed what he could do with studio constraints. By the way, if you guys want to subscribe, I'm going to start posting a lot here. Thanks. Anyways, Mean Streets. Released in 1973, this was Martin Scorsese's breakout film and his first major collaboration with Robert De Niro. Harvey Keitel plays Charlie, a small-time gangster caught between his Catholic conscience and his loyalty to his reckless friend Johnny Boy, played by De Niro. The film was made for roughly $500,000 and shot primarily in Los Angeles, even though it's set in New York's Little Italy. Scorsese used handheld cameras, naturalistic lighting, and on-location sound to create a raw, gritty atmosphere. The soundtrack featured rock and pop songs from the era, like the Ronettes and the Rolling Stones, a method Scorsese used to reflect the characters' emotional states. The film didn't follow a strict plot, focusing instead on character behavior, relationships, and internal conflict. It was one of the first American films to blend neorealism with American crime drama. The Catholic themes are deeply embedded, especially in Charlie's guilt and spiritual crisis. Violence is sudden and messy, used more to explore chaos than glamorize crime. This film established Scorsese's signature style, narration, tracking shots, street-level storytelling, and became a defining influence on American cinema. It was deeply personal, and critics noticed. Alice doesn't live here anymore. Released in 1974, this was Martin Scorsese's fourth feature and his first to center on a female lead. Ellen Burstyn plays Alice Hyatt, a widow who sets out with her son to pursue a singing career after her husband's death. Burstyn handpicked Scorsese to direct after being impressed by Mean Streets, wanting someone with a raw, emotional style. The film had a budget of around $1.8 million and was shot primarily in Tucson, Arizona. Scorsese brought a loose, improvisational energy to the project, encouraging the cast to ad-lib and react naturally. Cinematographer Kent Wakeford used a muted color palette and soft lighting to reflect Alice's internal world. The opening sequence mimics old Hollywood melodramas, contrasting sharply with the gritty realism that follows. The film deals with economic instability, gender roles, and emotional survival, themes rarely explored with such intensity at the time. Diane Ladd and Chris Christopherson round out the supporting cast, with Ladd earning an Academy Award nomination. Burstyn won Best Actress for the role. Scorsese avoided his usual male-dominated stories here, but the emotional violence, moral tension, and realism remained unmistakably his. Taxi Driver. Released in 1976, this was Martin Scorsese's fifth feature and marked a major turning point in his career. The script was written by Paul Schrader and drew on themes of loneliness, urban decay, and psychological instability. Robert De Niro plays Travis Bickle, a mentally unstable Vietnam War veteran who becomes a New York City cab driver. The budget was around $1.9 million, and shooting took place almost entirely in Manhattan, mostly at night, to capture the city's grim atmosphere. Scorsese used slow motion, overhead tracking shots, and moody lighting to immerse viewers in Travis's fractured mind. Bernard Herrmann composed the score, blending jazz with unsettling orchestration in what became his final film. The film includes stylized violence and heavy religious symbolism, especially in Travis's self-imposed martyrdom. It also features early performances by Jodie Foster, Harvey Keitel, and Sybil Shepherd. De Niro famously prepared by getting a cab license and working 12-hour shifts. The line, "You talking to me," was improvised and became iconic. The film sparked controversy for its violence, but earned the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It remains one of the most psychologically intense films Scorsese's ever directed. New York, New York. Released in 1977, this was Martin Scorsese's follow-up to Taxi Driver and his attempt to blend classic Hollywood musicals with a gritty, modern sensibility. The film stars Robert De Niro as Jimmy Doyle, a brash saxophonist, and Liza Minnelli as Francine Evans, a talented singer. The story follows their stormy relationship as they navigate careers in post-World War II New York's music scene. With a budget of around $14 million, it was one of Scorsese's most ambitious productions at the time. Much of the film was shot on constructed sets rather than real locations, deliberately evoking the artificial look of old studio musicals. The visual style features saturated colors, sweeping camera moves, and long takes. De Niro and Minnelli improvise many of their scenes, often leading to extended dialogue and emotional intensity. The famous title song, New York, New York, was written by John Kander and Fred Ebb and later became a signature anthem for Frank Sinatra. Despite its production scale, the film underperformed at the box office. Scorsese later admitted the troubled production mirrored the volatility in his personal life. It was ambitious, experimental, and emotionally raw. Raging Bull. Released in 1980, this was Martin Scorsese's biographical film about boxer Jake LaMotta, based on LaMotta's memoir. Robert De Niro stars as LaMotta and gained about 60 pounds to portray the boxer's later years, a transformation that became legendary. The screenplay, written by Paul Schrader and Mardik Martin, focused on themes of jealousy, self-destruction, and redemption. Scorsese chose to shoot the film in black and white to reflect the era and distance the audience from the violence. The boxing scenes were highly stylized with slow motion, exaggerated sound design, and abstract camera angles to convey LaMotta's inner turmoil. Cinematographer Michael Chapman used harsh lighting to emphasize the brutality. The budget was around $18 million, and filming took place in Los Angeles and New York. The editing by Thelma Schoonmaker was intense and rhythmic, especially during the fight sequences. Joe Pesci played LaMotta's brother Joey, while Kathy Moriarty portrayed his wife Vicky. De Niro won Best Actor at the Academy Awards, while Schoonmaker won for Best Editing. The film didn't perform strongly at first, but later gained acclaim. It's now considered one of the greatest American films ever made and a landmark in Scorsese's career. The King of Comedy. Released in 1982, this film saw Martin Scorsese pivot from violence and chaos into psychological satire. Robert De Niro plays Rupert Pupkin, a delusional aspiring comedian obsessed with fame. The screenplay, written by Paul D. Zimmerman, explored celebrity culture, isolation, and media obsession. It was shot mostly in New York City on a budget of around $19 million. Scorsese used static shots, long takes, and restrained camera work to emphasize the discomfort and awkwardness of Pupkin's social failures. The tone is dry and unsettling, intentionally lacking the explosive moments common in his earlier work. Sandra Bernhard plays Masha, a character as obsessive as Pupkin, and their kidnapping of Langford becomes the film's surreal climax. Unlike Scorsese's earlier protagonist, Pupkin is not violent, but his fantasy life is just as destructive. The film underperformed at the box office, but gained critical recognition for its eerie relevance. Scorsese intentionally kept the humor deadpan, letting the audience feel the tension without release. It's a sharp look at delusion, and De Niro's performance remains one of his most uncomfortable and studied. After Hours. Released in 1985, this was Martin Scorsese's return to low-budget filmmaking after larger studio projects. The film stars Griffin Dunne as Paul Hackett, a word processor who experiences a bizarre and escalating series of events over one night in downtown Manhattan. The screenplay was written by Joseph Minion, and the story unfolds almost entirely in real time. The budget was about $4.5 million, and it was shot in Soho using stylized lighting, canted angles, and fast-paced editing. Scorsese used long tracking shots, sudden zooms, and abrupt cuts to heighten the anxiety and surreal tone. The cast includes Rosanna Arquette, Linda Fiorentino, and Catherine O'Hara, each representing different levels of chaos and instability. The film explores themes of urban alienation, sexual frustration, and existential absurdity. Howard Shore composed a minimal moody score that underscored the film's tension. Despite the dark humor, Scorsese treated the pacing like a thriller, with constant momentum and increasingly irrational encounters. The film won Best Director at Cannes and was seen as a creative resurgence for Scorsese. It's a tightly controlled, unpredictable descent into paranoia and urban madness. The Color of Money. Released in 1986, this film was Martin Scorsese's first direct sequel, following up on The Hustler from 1961. Paul Newman reprises his role as Fast Eddie Felson, now retired but drawn back into the pool hall world after meeting a young hustler named Vincent, played by Tom Cruise. The screenplay was written by Richard Price and based on the novel by Walter Tevis. With a budget around $14 million, it was shot in Chicago and various pool halls across the Midwest. Scorsese used dynamic camera movements and stylized editing to make the pool games feel fast and aggressive. Cinematographer Michael Ballhaus employed low angles, fast pans, and rich colors to capture the energy of the game. The soundtrack featured blues and rock tracks to mirror the tension and cool swagger of the characters. Newman won his first Academy Award for Best Actor after multiple nominations across decades. Cruise performed many of his own pool shots, adding realism to Vincent's cocky energy. Scorsese focused less on the sport and more on manipulation, mentorship, and shifting power. It's sleek, sharply acted, and rooted in personal reinvention. The Last Temptation of Christ. Released in 1988, this was Martin Scorsese's long-gestating adaptation of Nikos Kazantzakis' controversial novel. Willem Dafoe stars as Jesus, portrayed as fully human and fully divine, struggling with doubt, fear, and temptation. The screenplay was written by Paul Schrader, and the film had a modest budget of about $7 million. It was shot in Morocco using natural light and a stripped-down visual style. Scorsese avoided traditional religious iconography, opting for a raw, earthy look that emphasized psychological and spiritual conflict. The film's most debated sequence is a vision of an alternate life where Jesus lives as a man, marrying Mary Magdalene, and aging peacefully. Peter Gabriel composed the score, blending world music with electronic sounds to enhance the film's spiritual tone. The cast includes Harvey Keitel as Judas and Barbara Hershey as Mary Magdalene. The film faced international protests and was banned in several countries for its unorthodox depiction of Jesus. Despite backlash, it was nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards. Scorsese viewed the project as a deeply personal expression of faith and inner struggle, not as blasphemy, but as exploration. Goodfellas. Released in 1990, this film marked one of Martin Scorsese's most iconic entries into the crime genre. Based on Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guy, it chronicles the rise and fall of mob associate Henry Hill, played by Ray Liotta. Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci co-stars Jimmy Conway and Tommy DeVito, with Pesci winning Best Supporting Actor for the role. The film was shot in New York and had a budget of around $25 million. Scorsese used freeze frames, whip pans, and voiceover narration to immerse viewers in Henry's perspective. The editing by Thelma Schoonmaker was rapid and rhythmic, especially in scenes like the famous Copacabana long take. The soundtrack included over 40 tracks, with music chosen to reflect the tone of each scene rather than just the time period. The violence was sudden and matter-of-fact, emphasizing the normalization of brutality in mob life. Lorraine Bracco played Karen Hill, whose voiceover offered a rare dual perspective. The film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards. Its layered structure, jump cuts, and constant momentum made it one of Scorsese's most influential works. It redefined the gangster film with style, detail, and brutal honesty. Cape Fear. Released in 1991, This was Martin Scorsese's remake of the 1962 thriller, itself based on John D. MacDonald's novel The Executioners. Robert De Niro plays Max Cady, a convicted rapist seeking revenge on his former defense attorney, Sam Bowden, played by Nick Nolte. The film had a budget of about $35 million and was shot in Florida and North Carolina. Scorsese used exaggerated camera angles, split diopters, and disorienting lighting to heighten the psychological tension. Elmer Bernstein reworked Bernard Herrmann's original score, blending it with new arrangements to amplify the suspense. De Niro reportedly paid a dentist $5,000 to make his teeth look decayed, then spent another $20,000 to fix them after shooting. The film explores themes of guilt, vengeance, and moral ambiguity, with Cady's twisted knowledge of the law turning the justice system into a weapon. Jessica Lange and Juliette Lewis round out the cast, with Lewis receiving an Academy Award nomination. The violence is intense and symbolic, especially in the storm-drenched climax. Scorsese pushed the boundaries of the thriller genre, turning it into a feverish study of fear, manipulation, and obsession. The Age of Innocence. Released in 1993, this was Martin Scorsese's adaptation of Edith Wharton's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel set in 1870 New York high society. The film stars Daniel Day-Lewis as Newland Archer, a wealthy lawyer engaged to Mae Welland, played by Winona Ryder, while drawn to the scandalized Countess Ellen Olenska, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. The budget was around $34 million, with production involving elaborate costume design, intricate set construction, and detailed period accuracy. Cinematographer Michael Ballhaus used soft lighting, long takes, and slow camera movements to mirror the repressed emotions beneath the formal world. Scorsese employed voiceover narration, taken directly from Wharton's prose, read by Joanne Woodward. The editing by Thelma Schoonmaker was deliberately restrained, building tension through subtle glances and pauses rather than action. The soundtrack, composed by Elmer Bernstein, used classical music to support the story's emotional undercurrents. The film won the Academy Award for Best Costume Design and received nominations for Art Direction, Score, and Supporting Actress. Unlike Scorsese's crime films, this one focused on internal conflict, social codes, and emotional restraint. It's one of his most visually elegant and emotionally restrained works, yet still deeply intense. Casino. Released in 1995, this was Martin Scorsese's return to organized crime, once again teaming with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. Based on Nicholas Pileggi's nonfiction book, the film follows the rise and fall of Sam Ace Rothstein, a gambling expert who runs a Las Vegas casino on behalf of the Chicago mob. The film had a budget of around $50 million and was shot on location in Las Vegas, with several scenes filmed in the actual Riviera casino. De Niro plays Rothstein with obsessive precision, while Pesci portrays Nicky Santoro, a violent enforcer based on real-life mobster Tony Spilotro. Sharon Stone plays Ginger McKenna, earning an Academy Award nomination for her performance. The narration shifts between characters, including overlapping voiceovers, creating a layered, subjective perspective. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing is rapid and relentless, especially during montages. The soundtrack spans decades, using dozens of tracks to capture the mood of each era. Scorsese used wide-angle lenses, freeze frames, and extreme close-ups to mirror the tension and excess of the casino world. It's not just about crime, but about greed, control, and the illusion of permanence in a city built on chance. Kundun. Released in 1997, this was Martin Scorsese's meditative biographical film about the 14th Dalai Lama, focusing on his early life and political exile. The screenplay was written by Melissa Matheson and based on interviews with the Dalai Lama. The film had a budget of about $28 million and was shot primarily in Morocco, as filming in Tibet was not permitted. Scorsese cast mostly non-professional Tibetan actors, including Tenzin Thuthob Sarong as the adult Dalai Lama. Cinematographer Roger Deakins used rich color palettes, precise compositions, and wide landscape shots to evoke spiritual and cultural depth. The film traces the Dalai Lama's life from childhood through the Chinese invasion of Tibet and his eventual escape to India in 1959. Philip Glass composed the minimalist score, which plays a major role in shaping the film's meditative tone. Dialogue is sparse, and Scorsese emphasized visual storytelling through symbolism, ritual, and dream sequences. The film avoids Western narrative conventions, instead focusing on inner transformation and non-violence. It faced diplomatic backlash, particularly from the Chinese government, but was praised for its craftsmanship. Kundun stands as one of Scorsese's most visually contemplative and politically delicate works. Bringing Out the Dead. Released in 1999, this film marked Martin Scorsese's return to New York for a psychological drama set over 3 nights in the life of a paramedic. Nicolas Cage stars as Frank Pierce, an exhausted and haunted emergency medical technician working in Hell's Kitchen. The screenplay was written by Paul Schrader, adapted from Joe Connolly's novel. The film had a budget of around $32 million and was shot entirely on location in New York City. Scorsese and cinematographer Robert Richardson used saturated colors, lens flares, and hallucinatory visuals to reflect Frank's mental collapse. The pacing combines long, chaotic sequences with abrupt silences, capturing the emotional toll of constant trauma. The soundtrack includes a mix of punk, soul, and ambient tracks to heighten the mood. Ving Rhames, John Goodman, and Tom Sizemore play fellow paramedics, each representing different coping mechanisms. Scorsese used first-person voiceover and rapid editing to immerse the viewer in Frank's disoriented perspective. The film explores themes of guilt, burnout, and the search for redemption in a decaying urban environment. Though it underperformed commercially, it's a stylistically intense, deeply existential entry in Scorsese's body of work. Gangs of New York. Released in 2002, this historical epic was Martin Scorsese's long-developing project about mid-19th century New York City. The story centers on Amsterdam Vallon, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who seeks revenge against Bill the Butcher Cutting, played by Daniel Day-Lewis for killing his father. The film is set in the Five Points neighborhood during a period of violent gang rivalries and political corruption. With a budget of about $100 million, it was one of Scorsese's most ambitious productions, filmed primarily on massive sets built in Cinecittà Studios in Rome. The production team recreated entire city blocks with historically accurate architecture and detail. Daniel Day-Lewis's performance as Bill was widely praised for its intensity and immersion, and he stayed in character throughout the shoot. The film combines brutal violence with political upheaval, including the draft riots of 1863. The cinematography by Michael Ballhaus used wide-angle shots, desaturated colors, and sweeping camera movements to capture the chaos. The score mixed traditional Irish folk with modern elements. It earned 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Director. Scorsese used the film to explore the roots of American identity through conflict, immigration, and power. The Aviator. Released in 2004, this biographical drama directed by Martin Scorsese focuses on the life of aviation pioneer and film producer Howard Hughes, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. The story covers Hughes' career from the late 1920s through the 1940s, including the production of Hell's Angels, his record-setting flights, and his worsening obsessive-compulsive disorder. The film had a budget of around $110 million and was shot in various locations, including California and Canada. Scorsese used color timing techniques to replicate the look of early 2-strip and 3-strip Technicolor processes, subtly shifting the palette to reflect different time periods. The cinematography by Robert Richardson featured sweeping crane shots, dynamic tracking, and period-accurate lighting. Cate Blanchett played Katharine Hepburn and won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. The production included detailed recreations of historical aircraft, with some scenes using practical models and full-size replicas. The editing by Thelma Schoonmaker maintained fast pacing through long stretches of dialogue and historical exposition. The film won 5 Academy Awards and was nominated for 11, including Best Picture and Best Director. Scorsese captured both Hughes' genius and descent into isolation with precision and grand visual style. The Departed. Released in 2006, this was Martin Scorsese's first remake of a foreign-language film since Cape Fear, adapted from the 2002 Hong Kong thriller Infernal Affairs. Set in Boston, it follows 2 moles, Billy Costigan, an undercover cop played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and Colin Sullivan, a mob mole inside the state police played by Matt Damon. Jack Nicholson stars as crime boss Frank Costello, a character loosely based on real-life gangster Whitey Bulger. The film had a budget of around $90 million and was shot in Boston and New York. Scorsese used fast cuts, tight framing, and visual contrast to build tension between dual identities. The script by William Monahan sharpened the original's themes with added layers of Catholic guilt, institutional corruption, and moral ambiguity. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing kept the momentum relentless. with rapid scene changes and sharp transitions. The soundtrack featured tracks by the Rolling Stones and Dropkick Murphys, including the heavily repeated I'm Shipping Up to Boston. The film earned 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, Scorsese's first Oscar win. It's a violent, paranoid story about deception, loyalty, and the collapse of identity under pressure. Shudder Island. Released in 2010, this psychological thriller was directed by Martin Scorsese and based on the novel by Dennis Lehane. Leonardo DiCaprio stars as U.S. Marshal Teddy Daniels, who arrives at a remote asylum to investigate a patient's disappearance. The film had a budget of around $80 million and was shot in Massachusetts, including actual locations like the abandoned Medfield State Hospital. Scorsese used tight close-ups, disorienting transitions, and surreal imagery to reflect Teddy's unraveling mental state. The production design recreated 1950s architecture and institutional interiors with a detailed realism. Cinematographer Robert Richardson used a muted, stormy color palette, while the soundtrack featured modern classical compositions instead of a traditional score. The editing by Thelma Schoonmaker intentionally blurred the line between reality and delusion. The supporting cast included Mark Ruffalo, Ben Kingsley, and Max von Sydow. The narrative structure revolves around flashbacks, hallucinations, and unreliable perception, culminating in a major twist. Scorsese constructed the film to be rewatched, with subtle visual cues and hidden symbolism throughout. It was a box office success and sparked debate over its ambiguous ending. It's a tense, layered study of trauma, guilt, and psychological collapse. Hugo. Released in 2011, this was Martin Scorsese's first film shot in 3D and his first aimed at a younger audience. Based on Brian Selznick's illustrated novel The Invention of Hugo Cabret, the story follows Hugo, an orphan living in a Paris train station in the 1930s, who uncovers a hidden connection between his late father and early cinema pioneer, Georges Méliès. Asa Butterfield stars as Hugo, with Ben Kingsley playing Méliès. The film had a budget of around $150 million, making it Scorsese's most expensive production at the time. Cinematographer Robert Richardson used digital 3D cameras, crafting elaborate tracking shots and layered depth to emphasize both the machinery of the station and the wonder of filmmaking. The production recreated the station with full-scale sets, while visual effects were used to reconstruct Méliès's silent films. Howard Shore composed the score, blending classical and French elements. Thelma Schoonmaker edited with a rhythm that balanced adventure with introspection. The film explores themes of loss, invention, and the preservation of art. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Cinematography and Best Visual Effects. It's a deeply personal tribute to the origins of cinema. The Wolf of Wall Street. Released in 2013, this was Martin Scorsese's adaptation of Jordan Belfort's memoir about stock market fraud and excess in the 1990s. Leonardo DiCaprio stars as Belfort, delivering a performance built around greed, manipulation, and manic charisma. The film had a budget of around $100 million and was shot in New York, New Jersey, and Long Island. Scorsese used fast-paced editing, freeze frames, and fourth wall breaks to mirror Belfort's chaotic rise and collapse. The screenplay, written by Terrence Winter, emphasized rapid dialogue and moral detachment, making it one of Scorsese's darkest comedies. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing kept the 3-hour runtime tight, balancing long dialogue scenes with bursts of montage and surreal excess. The film includes over 600 uses of profanity and scenes of drug use, financial scams, and debauchery, many drawn directly from court records and Belfort's testimony. The cast includes Jonah Hill, Margot Robbie, and Kyle Chandler. The film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. DiCaprio won a Golden Globe for his performance. Scorsese turned a real financial scandal into an unflinching, high-speed portrait of corruption, delusion, and moral bankruptcy. Silence. Released in 2016, this was Martin Scorsese's long-planned adaptation of Shusaku Endo's novel about 17th century Jesuit missionaries in Japan. The film stars Andrew Garfield as Father Sebastián Rodriguez and Adam Driver as Father Francisco Garupe, priests who travel to Japan searching for their mentor, Father Ferreira, played by Liam Neeson. The film had a budget of around $50 million and was shot primarily in Taiwan, with natural landscapes standing in for feudal Japan. Scorsese used minimal artificial lighting and a subdued color palette to emphasize the harshness and isolation faced by the characters. The cinematography by Rodrigo Prieto features still compositions, slow zooms, and long silences that reflect the spiritual weight of the story. There's no traditional score. Ambient sounds like wind, water, and insects dominate the audio. The narrative centers on faith, doubt, and martyrdom, with graphic depictions of persecution and internal conflict. The script was co-written by Scorsese and Jay Cox and took nearly 3 decades to reach production. The editing by Thelma Schoonmaker was intentionally restrained, allowing scenes to linger. It received critical acclaim and an Academy Award nomination for cinematography. It's one of Scorsese's most austere and spiritually challenging films. The Irishman. Released in 2019, this epic crime drama reunited Martin Scorsese with Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Al Pacino, adapting Charles Brandt's book, I Heard You Paint Houses. De Niro plays Frank Sheeran, a World War II veteran and mob hitman, reflecting on decades of involvement with the Bufalino crime family and union leader Jimmy Hoffa. The film had a budget of around $159 million and was produced by Netflix. It used groundbreaking digital de-aging technology to allow the main actors to portray their characters across multiple decades, requiring extensive visual effects work by industrial light and magic. Cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto used muted tones and natural lighting to differentiate time periods. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing maintained a slow, deliberate rhythm over the 3.5-hour runtime. Scorsese avoided stylized violence, presenting hits with cold efficiency. The film explores aging, regret, and moral erosion, especially through Frank's passive role in historical crimes. Pacino's performance as Hoffa was loud and theatrical, while Pesci's was reserved and quietly threatening. It earned 10 Academy Award nominations. Unlike earlier gangster films, this one is quiet, mournful, and deeply focused on the consequences of loyalty and silence. Killers of the Flower Moon. Released in 2023, this historical crime drama directed by Martin Scorsese is based on David Grant's nonfiction book detailing the Osage murders in 1920s Oklahoma. The story follows the systematic killings of wealthy Osage Nation members after oil is discovered on their land. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Ernest Burkhart, who marries Molly Kyle, portrayed by Lily Gladstone, while being manipulated by his uncle William Hale, played by Robert De Niro. The film had a budget of around $200 million and was shot in Oklahoma, with close collaboration from the Osage Nation to ensure cultural accuracy. Scorsese shifted the script's focus during development to center Molly's perspective, emphasizing indigenous experience and resistance. Rodrigo Prieto's cinematography used wide landscapes, natural light, and period-accurate lighting to ground the visuals. The score, composed by Robbie Robertson, combined traditional instrumentation with blues and ambient sounds. Thelma Schoonmaker's editing maintained a deliberate pace, contrasting bursts of violence with long, quiet scenes. The film explores themes of exploitation, complicity, and institutional betrayal. It earned 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Scorsese crafted a brutal, expansive examination of American violence masked by legal power. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot here. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.